The Time Machine Did It, Chapter 10. It was harder to break out of that place than I thought it would be. Now I know how nuclear bombs feel. Those walls are thick. Damn thick. The old burly shove didn't work at all. Neither did the burly nose ram. So I decided to get tricky. First I tried going through the ventilation duct, but I just ended up inside a huge air conditioner. I'm told they could hear my screams all over the building, coming out of all those little vents, and that many people in the building found this annoying. A number of them had to turn their TVs up. I try to keep it down in situations like that, but sometimes you just can't. Then I convinced all the other prisoners to help me build a big fire, explaining that we would all be able to escape when the criminals smelled the smoke, panicked, and opened the door. I forgot how airtight those civil defense places are. Nobody smelled any smoke except us, and we smelled it too well. The other prisoners didn't have anything else to put out the fire with, so they used me. Then they stubbed me out and tossed me in the corner. That's what you get for trying to be a leader. Sometimes I don't know why we leaders bother. By this time I was pretty much out of escape ideas. That's the way it usually is with me. Once I've climbed into something and set fire to something else, I'm done. I always read about people in these situations suddenly saying, "I've got a plan." And they do, and it's great. Where do they get these plans? That's what I want to know. I never have any plans. And why didn't they think of a plan before so they wouldn't be in this fix? I don't get it. I checked with Groggins to see if he could think of anything. Maybe he was one of those guys with all the plans. To my amazement, he not only had a plan, he already had an escape device built. I was impressed. This was just outstanding. The crooks had set up a small lab down there for Groggins to work on inventions for them. In his spare time, he had been secretly working on an escape device for himself. It was a teleporting machine like they have in Star Trek. In fact, he said he got the idea and the design by watching an episode of Star Trek. He said he did most of his research in this way, by reading science fiction books, watching monster movies, and so on. I looked at him like he was nuts. He noticed the look and immediately got defensive. "I realize my methods are unconventional. Some people think I'm mad, but you don't, do you?" "Sure." He felt I might not be looking at the thing from the right angle. "I might just be ahead of my time. People often mistake genius for insanity. That might be what's happening here." "You're the screwiest guy I've ever met." He decided I didn't fully understand how his technique worked. That was the problem. He took a moment to explain. "All the real worthwhile inventions have already been thought of by hack science fiction writers," he informed me. "I'm surprised no one has actually sat down and tried to build any of the stuff they write about. A lot of it is really easy to make. Disintegrating rays, invisibility potions, time machine. The hard thing isn't developing these inventions, it's coming up with the concept in the first place. The hack writers of this world are the real geniuses, but they're bad businessmen. They think up the idea, figure out how the machine would have to work, then sell the whole concept to whoever wants it for a few dollars. Plus, they give you an exciting story too. All the inventor has to do is experiment around to find the missing pieces of the puzzle. And if you steal one of their ideas and make a fortune off it, they're completely happy and swagger around saying they foresaw it. If they're satisfied with that, fine. I wouldn't be. I'd be suing everybody's asses off." He said he got the time machine right on the 5th try. The first 4 didn't so much travel in time as they burned down his house. But he said this first version of his teleporter looked to him like a winner. Against my better judgment, I let him talk me into sitting down in his teleporter and giving it a try. But aside from scorching my clothes and blowing off some of my hair, it didn't do anything. He said no problem. He told me to go get some coffee and read a magazine over and over. He'd have his teleporter Mark II finished in less than a year. I didn't want to wait that long, so I quit being cute about the whole thing and just launched myself out a missile silo. I'm not very ballistically shaped, so I only flew about 80 yards before I landed on top of a restaurant. As I limped home, I saw a long line of criminals impatiently waiting their turn to get into a photo booth. That seemed odd to me. Criminals are vain, but not that vain. At the most, they got their pictures taken maybe once a month, and usually they have it done at the police station where it's free. While I was puzzling about this, The booth shimmered and went out of focus briefly. Then the door opened and a crook came out carrying some loot and a briefcase. He handed the briefcase to the next crook, who went inside, and the booth started shimmering and going out of focus again. I figured I knew what was going on. I had heard about this. As I watched, one criminal apparently traveled into the future because he came out of the booth with silver foil suit, an overdeveloped forehead, and $8,000 in currency that was no good here. He had a futuristic ray gun, which he tried out on a pedestrian, instantly blasting him into fragments. Everyone laughed except the pedestrian, and I didn't laugh for very long. It's actually not very funny when you think about it. The next crook came out of the booth dragging a bucket full of crown jewels. Hey, I thought, these guys are doing all right. I wanted to keep an eye on all this, but I didn't want to attract attention, so I pretended to be reading a newspaper. My act looked even more convincing when a newspaper blew up against my leg, which I then used as a prop. It was evidently a newspaper brought back by one of the crooks from a different time period. It said it was the year 2156, and the headline was, "Apes Become Our Masters." The subhead was, "Hollywood Right Again." And inside there was an editorial blasting the whole deal. Apparently, the apes took over after a series of increasingly violent peace demonstrations led to our unspeakably savage and bloody universal brotherhood and love thy neighbor wars. I did a little of the crossword puzzle. Most of the answers were banana, or pretty banana, so that was fairly easy. Then looked up at time to see the last of the criminals coming out of the photo booth. Everyone else had their turn and gone away with the spoils. This last one came out struggling under the weight of a small printing press that had, "If found, returned to Johannes Gutenberg, 15th century," painted on it. The criminal was having trouble carrying both the printing press and the briefcase, so he just tossed the briefcase off to one side. It landed on the hood of a parked car. This was exactly the sort of careless behavior that Groggins had been complaining about, and that I had been waiting for. I watched the criminal lug his burden into the nearest pawn shop, which already had Watt's steam engine and George Washington's face in the window. Then I sprinted across the street, grabbed the briefcase off the hood of the car, and made a beeline for my office.